Well, the 25th anniversary of the September 11th attacks are almost here. We've got about another month and a couple weeks to go. I have devoted a quarter of a century of my life to talking about 9/11. Not only what happened that day, the evidence for what happened that day, but also the relevance of 9/11 for the broader peace movement. And you think that would be a no-brainer, but that's not the world we live in. So the way that most people on the left, or most people in the peace movement, most people who are against imperialism, view 9/11 is as blowback for bad policy decisions that the U.S. has made. The chicken's coming home to roost. Um, it's what Max Blumenthal has called the management of savagery in response to our current despot, Donald Trump. And it's unlikely that these wars that are now raging across the Middle East, it's unlikely that any of them would have been possible had activists stepped up to the plate in the years following 9/11 and really made the truth about it center stage. And there was a lot of that, but obviously not enough to affect general sea change in the population. Um, I think it's obvious what Dr. Kevin Barrett has said, that 9/11 is the Christmas gift that just keeps on giving, because there's no end of mileage that elites have milked from it. Um, it's very sad, uh, and it points to when there are these state crimes against democracy, points to something really dark in the American psyche, um, that they don't want to believe that the American government wages war on its own populations. And the truth about September 11th matters. And there's new research all the time that's being done. I don't think people are aware of all the new research that's come in. So one of the debates within the 9/11 truth movement in like about the first decade was whether airplanes were used, um, or whether they were automated, or whether they were holograms, or whether they were drones, or whether dummy airplanes were sent up in its place. There's now been a study that's been done uh, showing that even experienced pilots and military pilots could not have flown the trajectories that were attributed to the 9/11 hijackers on 9/11, uh, where experienced pilots entered flight simulators and were unable to recreate the trajectories that were attributed uh, to pilots, but which would be easy if these were somehow automated missiles, drones, or dummy planes, or whatever. Um, it's very difficult for me to understand how activists who are ostensibly against American imperialism, people like Noam Chomsky, would be so hostile to even looking at evidence for official complicity. Um, it's futile to oppose war without going to the root cause of the war on terror, the privations of the civil liberties and the suspensions of constitutional rights. And it just keeps on going and going and going. And it really reveals something deep within the American psyche that even in spite of all the overwhelming evidence for official orchestration of the September 11th attacks, so many Americans are like, I don't want to see anything, I don't want to hear anything. It's like a family with abuse going on. And as Pierce Robinson has pointed out eloquently, the relationship between the public and the state is like a parent-child relationship. And when there's abuse going on, we just don't want to look. Um, the implications of knowing the truth about 9/11 or letting yourself be penetrated by the research and the overwhelming evidence, the implications of which are revolutionary, because most Americans already have a revolutionary ideology inside of them. Noam Chomsky, arguably the most famous peace activist of the 20th century, one of a handful of the most well-known, certainly. I think he's 99 years old now, in a wheelchair. In a wheelchair in Brazil. He had a blog post on a website that he managed for a while, where he said that were it discovered, I mean, he was speaking hypothetically, but it speaks to this pitchforks and torches moment, which he acknowledged. Were the truth about, or were it generally known and found out and discovered that Bush administration orchestrated the September 11th attacks, they would all be lined up before firing squads, and the Republican Party would be dead forever. That's what he said. He wasn't saying what he thought should happen. He wasn't even saying what he wanted to happen. He was saying what he thought would happen based on the American psyche. And we look at Iran and we demonize them when they say death to America and death to Israel. In the media, they say, oh, how backwards and how barbaric. But actually, if another country was coming to the United States and doing what the United States is doing to Iran, and the culprits were identified and known within the United States, Americans wouldn't wait for a trial. They would come out with the proverbial pitchforks and torches. They string the people up. That's how Americans think. And look at TV programs that happened, TV programs that were produced after the September 11th attacks, like 24, where they make this argument that you can't go through the legal structures and you can't wait for that final proof in the courtroom. You got to just take action because the terrorists are out to get you. And everything that was justified with the state of emergency which followed in the wake of 9/11. And now imagine all that being applied to the state. It's hard for people to take that second to even think hypothetically about what would happen were the American people to become generally aware of the facts around 9/11. It's hard for them to take that hypothetical position because there's a religious faith in the institutions of the United States, that the institutions are there to protect us. And there's a fervor and an intensity of the belief that the U.S. presidents don't wage war against their own citizens. But to that, I would say you don't know history, because studying history, especially the history of the Cold War, the 20th century, there's a very rich history, even admittedly, of false flag terrorism. So 9/11 is the elephant in the room. It's the reason that somebody like Donald Trump can take control. It's the key to stopping the genocide in Gaza. It's the key to dismantling the warfare state, putting away the crime ministers of Israel. And it's the key to really letting the Trump administration marinate in their own incompetence. It's all because of 9/11. But those of us in the 9/11 truth movement have faced resistance, and it's uphill work for us because those in the peace movement and in the anti-war movement, whether on the left or the right, that should be leading the charge, they're working against us. They call us conspiracy theorists, which is really an interesting term if you think about it, because like if you compare the legal systems of the U.S. with other parts of the world, the U.S. inherited the English common law, where conspiracy was a concept going back centuries. And if you look at the court filings for over last 20, 30 years, the word conspiracy appears millions of times. In French law and Spanish law, the doctrine is there, but they speak of criminal associations and other things. But the word conspiracy is used in courtrooms all across America every day. So part of what we're dealing with is the high standards that are used in jurisprudence are abandoned when we talk about journalism. And Lance DeHaven Smith, the late social theorist, he introduced a concept called SCAD. It's the acronym that stands for State Crimes Against Democracy. He really gave us a template to be able to speak about these things while avoiding language that's traditionally been demonized in American politics, like using the word conspiracy, which doesn't mean anything because it's been completely emptied of its meaning. But also Peter Dale Scott, who coined the term structural deep events to explain events like 9/11 and other things. When there are state crimes against democracy, of which 9/11 is one of many examples, the investigations into these crimes tend to be highly controlled, tightly framed, and totally reliant on institutions and organizations which stand to be embarrassed by such investigations. The proverbial fox guarding the henhouse. The evidence now is overwhelming. There's new evidence coming out. There's new research coming out all the time. One of the most interesting new pieces of evidence about 9/11. So for the first 10 years or so of the 9/11 truth movement, there was a debate about whether airplanes were used, whether there were dummy planes, whether there were drones, whether there were missiles that flew into New York and the Pentagon. And recently, some activists got together, experienced pilots, including some fighter pilots, and had them in flight simulators trying to recreate the trajectories, seeing if they could fly the trajectories that were attributed to the hijacker pilots that day. And they were unable to, showing the complete impossibility of pilots, much less the inexperienced pilots that were told took over the planes on 9/11, the complete inability to perform those maneuvers. But it becomes easy if you think about the automation. And when 9/11 happened, the drone technology was still in its infancy. I think it's a lot easier for people to understand now. As incidentally, the ability to recreate voices, using samples. But actually, what happened was the airplanes were downed, were put into hangars, and then certain passengers were kidnapped and forced to make phone calls as if they were flying on the planes, which is another complete impossibility. The cell phone technology at the time couldn't have made those phone calls from altitudes. The, the passengers were killed, and dummy planes were sent up in their stead. Um, it speaks volumes about the priorities and it speaks volumes about the priorities of Americans that they could be fine with just letting it go when there is something that is so dastardly that has been stinking and putrefying in American society and American culture for so long. And 9/11 and those that did it, they didn't come out of nowhere. They're part of a cartel that was bringing cocaine and heroin into the United States for decades. Starting in 1980, this cartel moved into the White House. They stayed in the White House till 2008. Before 1980, the different agencies in the United States smuggled drugs. But what changed in 1980 was the White House became a center for bringing tons and tons of heroin and cocaine into the United States. And just like Pablo Escobar bombed airplanes, and just like Pablo Escobar put bombs in public places, the things that go along with narco trafficking, assassinations, terrorism, money laundering, these things go together. For any functioning and successful drug cartel, you need four elements. You need the production, you need the transportation, you need the distribution, and you need the protection. So the first element of this, the production, this was carried out in Colombia during the 80s, in the heyday of the cocaine epoch, but, or it's carried out in the Golden Triangle in Laos, where they grow the poppies that make heroin. But the three most important facets of a highly successful functioning drug cartel, the transportation, these are all carried out by the military. Because if you have control of the military bases and the shipping, you can just fly airplanes into military bases and avoid all controls. The distribution, the CIA and the FBI working with their contacts in the United States Mafia to distribute it. And then the protection, which is the courts, the media. So the history of false flag terrorism is also very interesting because you see that it didn't start with 9/11. There were many similar false flag terrorist attacks before 9/11. Operation Gladio, Oklahoma City, just like there have been many false flag terrorist attacks since 9/11. The 7/7 London subway bombings. So I don't advocate for violence. That's not my style. But I know the American people well enough to know that were the truth about 9/11 generally known, there would be that proverbial pitchforks and torches moment, and Americans wouldn't wait. It is common in journalism to talk about what crowds would do under certain circumstances, presented with new evidence. But there is a high level of cognitive dissonance because even people who are critical of the American government, most of the time, they don't want to believe that the Bush administration, even the Bush administration, would be capable of doing such a heinous thing. The tide may be turning as more high-profile journalists and celebrities lend their voice to this most important theme, the truth about 9/11, the Christmas gift, which keeps on giving, because there is literally no end of mileage that elites have milked from this, and the demonization of Islam. With as I speak, the Middle East is on fire with this new war. So, encourage everybody to get involved, get active. There's something everybody can do. Nothing else than just sharing these reports. Thank you very much.